What's up, guys? Welcome back to Inside Out Precision. Today we're going to talk about a couple things. The first is an update on the Easton Axis 4mm. Had some issues with the inserts mushrooming these out on the front, and it came down to the glue. So we're going to talk about that. I've also got like 3 subscriber questions that people asked. I put a thing out the other day on Instagram just saying, hey, if you have any questions, let me know. And a lot of questions came up about arrows. So we're going to talk more about those. And yeah, just kind of give some basic info. As you can see, I'm at my house here. I'm not at the shop. I don't need anything besides this broken arrow that I already have to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So yeah, let's dive right in. I made a video a couple months ago on these new Axis 4mm, and in that video I talked about how I recommended using the low temp hot melt that Boning makes in order to insert these in case I hit something hard and needed to pull the insert. Like if I bent the insert, I didn't want to throw away the whole arrow. I wanted to be able to pull the insert and, reinsert it with a non-bent one. Normal hot melt, or like the epoxy that Easton has, there is such a small window when you're heating it up to where it's soft enough to pull the insert, but not hot enough to where it'll ruin the carbon. Most carbon arrows, if you heat them up to where the thing just pulls right out, it pulls out like that inner layer of carbon with it, and you ruin the whole arrow by pulling the insert. So I wanted something, and I've used that low temp hot melt on like all of my outdoor target arrows. Like any carbon target arrow I've ever had, I've used that and I've never had any issues with it. But this bow that I'm shooting is going a lot faster than any target bow, and this arrow is a lot heavier than any target arrow. And after experimenting with that glue, I don't know if you saw my Instagram post, but I was just shooting some 3D targets out at my boss's place, and this particular one, you can see how that's kind of mushroomed out on the end there. This actually, I was shooting a coyote that was like quartered away, and they're pretty shot up inserts, so it went through the 10 ring and it hit that plastic tubing that holds the insert into the rest of the target. And when I pulled it out, my insert was just shoved all the way down into my arrow. And so I kind of just chalked that one up to a fluke. I thought, well, maybe I didn't get enough glue on that one or something. But then it happened 2 more times. And one of them, I have no idea what it hit. I was working on like picking a spot to aim at on a 3D target. And so there was a fallow deer out there. And I was aiming at one of the spots like on its hind quarter, which is not a very shot up part of the target. It's just it's a fairly fresh foam, I guess you could say. And when I pulled that arrow, it was the same thing. It had shoved down that insert, not as badly as this one, but nonetheless, it still mushroomed it out. The third one, I have no idea what it could have hit. It was right in the soft part of the 10 ring. I didn't hear anything weird. Now, granted, it is possible a lot of people shoot out there. There could have been, like an insert or a field point or something that somebody had left in there. And I could have hit that, but I didn't see any evidence that my field point had hit anything hard. It wasn't flattened or bent or nicked or anything like that. So I have no idea what that hit. But needless to say, it was a little bit discouraging because these are very expensive arrows. Obviously I could cut this down a little bit and reinsert it, but it's not going to be the same length as all my other arrows. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep this as like a backup of backups, or if I'm shooting a steel target or something, I'll shoot it at that. But I called Easton, told them what the deal was, talked to a lot of other people that have been shooting these, and basically what it comes down to is they highly recommended using the HIT epoxy. They said that low temp hot melt does not have as strong of a bond as that epoxy, and so when it hits something, if it breaks loose at all, that arrow is just going to keep going. And because this is a heavier arrow traveling faster, like this is 456 grains and it's going 303 feet a second. My target bow, they're going pretty quick. They're probably high 280s, low 290s, but they're only being pushed by 60 pounds. They weigh like 360 grains. There's not a lot of momentum there behind that insert. On top of that, the other customers that we've used the epoxy on have not had any problems with this. So I pulled all the inserts that I used the low temp hot melt on. I used the HIT epoxy that comes with them, and I've not had any issues since. I've been shooting out there. I've hit hard spots. I've hit the tubes, whatever, and I've not had any issues with those inserts. So I apologize if I misled you on that. I really didn't think it would be an issue, but obviously it is. So don't use the low temp hot melt. use the 2-part epoxy, let them sit overnight, and they'll be good to shoot. You know, I've kind of chalked it up to, like, the reason I wanted to use the low temp hot melt was because if I hit something, like I said, I wanted to be able to pull the insert without breaking the arrow. And I've kind of concluded that with those titanium inserts, if I hit something hard enough to bend a titanium insert, it's probably going to break the arrow anyway. And it really concerned me, you know, if I'm shooting these for hunting, if it shoves an insert in on a plastic tube, what's it going to do if it hits a rib bone or, you know, any sort of hard tissue on an animal? So I just epoxied them all, haven't had any issues. I recommend you do the same. So now we'll jump into some user questions. So I've got 3 of them to answer here. Sorry, I got them on my phone here. Back to the arrow thing. This is from _guy303. Video idea. There's a whole heavy versus fast debate going on, and it would be great to get your input talking about arrows. So if you've watched my channel in the past, you probably know my take on this crazy heavy arrow trend. I am not a big fan of arrows, you know, for just general hunting use, like white-tailed deer, elk, you know, antelope, whatever. I'm not a fan of these arrows that are like 600 plus grains. Arrow weight is going to have a lot to do with your setup. Obviously, somebody who's pulling 26-inch draw and 60 pounds is not going to want to shoot as heavy of an arrow as somebody who's got a 31-inch draw and pulling 80 pounds. A lot of people confuse kinetic energy with momentum, okay? And every time I make one of these videos, people go, oh, have you read Dr. Ashby and Ranch Fairy? And it's like, yes, I understand the math. Kinetic energy is the energy of the arrow in flight until it hits the target. So speed is a big factor in kinetic energy. The faster I can throw that, the more kinetic energy that's going to have. But as soon as it hits the target, that all translates to momentum, right? And momentum is calculated by mass times velocity. So the size and weight of your arrow multiplied by the speed that it's traveling. So if I have an extremely high mass and a very low velocity, I lose momentum. It's also, you know, the flip side. If I have extremely high velocity but very low mass, I lose momentum. So again, it's about finding that sweet spot. And to be honest, I'm just going to throw out some numbers there that I think work really well for like pretty average setups. So anybody in that, like, you know, 27 to 29 inch draw length range, I think an arrow for, and this is maybe excluding big game like buffalo or muskox or like moose, but most North American big game, deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, whatever. If you're 27 to 29 inches, any arrow in that, like, you know, 445 to like 480 range is going to be plenty of speed and momentum when it hits to pass through that animal. You know, we had a guy call the other day who was shooting, he was 26-inch draw. He was pulling 80 pounds, but he got set up with these day 6 arrows and they weighed 680 grains. And he could barely get 60 yards out of his sight. And speed to a certain point is accuracy. And I don't mean that like a heavy arrow can't be accurate if you have your sight set perfectly, but you're not always going to be able to range an animal. You know, if I'm elk hunting and I call in a bull and I've ranged the tree that, you know, I think he's going to come by at 25 yards. And when he walks out, he's somewhere, I estimate, he's somewhere between 15 and 20 yards behind that tree. So I don't have time to range him. I just set my sight, you know, draw back and shoot. And an arrow that heavy has such a high trajectory on it that if I misjudge that yardage by 4 or 5 yards, that arrow is going to drop significantly, like probably out of the kill zone. So now you either have a miss or a wounded animal. An arrow that's shooting a lot flatter trajectory, I can misjudge something by 5-6 yards and I'm only going to drop 3 or 4 inches. I'm still going to be in that kill zone. So that's kind of my take on that. You know, a great example is actually my boss's daughter. She was 13, I think, 13 or 14. This was 2 seasons ago. She killed 3 bucks. She killed a whitetail in Kansas, a blacktail here, and an axis deer in Maui. And she was pulling 43 pounds, shooting a like 360 grain arrow. And, you know, she has like a 24-inch draw length, and she blew right through every single one of them. So, you know, had she been shooting like a 480 grain arrow or something like that, I mean, they could have jumped the string and got out of the way. The axis deer did jump the string, even with what she was shooting. But, you know, one of them, you can hear it in the video, like her dad's just like, you know, 35 yards. Well, it was actually 38. She hit a touch low, but she still killed it. She caught the bottom of the heart and killed it. If she was shooting a 450 grain arrow, she would have missed that animal completely. So a 450 grain arrow to her would be the equivalent of like a 600 something grain arrow to, you know, an adult. I just don't think it's that necessary personally. So that's kind of my take on that. Now, if you're shooting a 31-inch draw length and 80 pounds, yeah, shoot a 550, 580 grain arrow. You're still going to push it at 270 feet a second. Pardon me. But it's, in my opinion, penetration is going to come more down to good shot placement and a well-tuned bow. Like if that arrow enters going perfectly straight, that it doesn't have to work to cut the hide. If that arrow enters like this, now I lose so much energy when that arrow hits the target. It's just going to and kick and not get any penetration. So heavy arrow is just kind of, a really heavy arrow is just kind of a band-aid for a poor shot. Usually if I hit an animal in a spot where I'm going to need that super heavy arrow, whether that arrow is heavy or not, it's probably not going to kill the animal. Like if I just send one through the hind quarter, I don't care how heavy your arrow is and what kind of penetration you get, you're probably not going to kill that animal. So that's my take on it. Love it or hate it. All right, next question here. Does switching from an index release to a thumb or handheld release change your draw length? What do you need to think about before switching? I know a lot of guys telling me that they made the switch and now the bow feels too short or too long. Would just like your insight on the subject. So that's a good question. It's very hard to find an index and a handheld that will feel the same at full draw. Usually though, it's not so much a draw length issue as it is the length of your D loop and your peep height. For example, when like my bow set up for a handheld, when I go to my index, I would need to drop my peep height probably 1/8 of an inch. Conversely, if it was set up for my index, when I went to my handheld, I would be scrunching into that peep, which can give you kind of a short feel. That's because a lot of the neck length, so like in a handheld, the distance from like my knuckles to where that hook is going to be different most likely than that same distance on an index style release. So it's probably not so much a draw length issue. You could probably give it like a 1/4 inch on your D loop and it's gonna feel totally fine. But you may need to experiment with your draw length change. There's not a definite answer there, but you're definitely probably gonna have to play with your loop length and almost positively gonna have to change your peep height a little bit. So it's really hard to find an index and a handheld that are gonna feel the same and they definitely aren't gonna impact the same. So yeah, it's kind of pick one or the other. You know, it's hard to find one to go back and forth between. Even index to index release is gonna feel different, or handheld to handheld is gonna feel different. Good example of that is, you know, I'm shooting that Stand Perfects with my EVL setup right now, and when I shoot my hinge, I feel like my anchor is floating a little bit because the neck on that hinge, the distance from my knuckles to the hook is further. So even though the strings hit me in the same spot, my hand is further back on my face. So I would need to shorten up that loop to suck that hand tight into my face. And it doesn't take much. We're talking, you know, 1/8 of a quarter or maybe 1/4 of an inch. So definitely something that you need to think about and really just kind of play around with it. I don't have a number for you. Everyone's going to be different. So that's a good question though. Okay, last question here. Micro diameter arrow setup. Are you able to get a strong helical on a 4mm shaft? So yes, you definitely can. You know, it's going to take some pretty fine tuning of that jig to make sure that it seats correctly. But I'm not sure why you want to put a really strong helical on any arrow. A really strong helical, like if I have like a 16-degree helical on a vane, and you'll see those where they're like wrapped around the shaft, they're going to fly really well to about maybe 40 yards. After that, what happens is known, I call it like the parachute effect, and I actually had an engineer explain this to me, and I wish I remembered all the terms, but it was like over a year ago. And basically what happens is if that arrow is spinning too fast, if the RPMs are too high on that arrow, once the shaft slows down past a certain velocity, those vanes are spinning so fast that it takes over the back of the arrow and it actually totally destabilizes it. It literally will turn into this like it grabs the air and starts spinning the back of the arrow. So you get these your groups just open up at long distance. You know, especially if you're shooting a 4-fletch, you need very little helical. Most arrows that I build are going to be somewhere between like 2 and 4 degree helical. You know, whether that's right or left, that's totally up to you. But it needs to spin. A straight vane is not good. That arrow is going to kind of knuckleball. You know, anything that has accuracy spins. Look at, you know, golf balls, baseballs, bullets, footballs. You know, that spinning is what helps give it direction. But if you spin it too fast, you're going to have issues downrange. And I know guys say, oh, I can still put them in a 4-inch circle at 40 yards. It's like, okay, 4-inch circle, like, I'm not saying that's bad shooting by any means, but like, I want my arrows like, chink, I want them touching at 40 yards. And I just don't get that with a high helical. So yes, it is possible, but I would not recommend it. And the more vanes you have, the less helical you need, because each one is going to help spin that arrow. So anyway, that's my take on these issues, guys. I know there's probably going to be some debate over those. This is just my experience. I see a lot of setups. I work on a lot of setups, and I have a pretty good feel over the years of kind of what seems to perform the best. So if you have any more questions, hit that comment section below or hit me up on Instagram. I'm doing my best to get back to all you guys. It's tough, but I am trying, I promise. And yeah, we really appreciate all the support both on the channel and on the website, which, speaking of, if you want to get some cool merch, well, it's kind of hard to see on the camera there, but got shirts, we got hats, got all sorts of stuff on InsideOutPrecision.com. So head on over there if you want to support the channel and get yourself some fresh threads, yo. Anyway, thanks again for watching, guys. Remember, precision is a decision. Keep them in the middle, and I'll see you on the range.